time to strap in for another edition of the CarsGuide Podcast, the show that takes you beyond the test drive. This is episode number 226. Why are Aussies such bad drivers? I'm CarsGuide Deputy Editor James Cleary, and joining me in establishing why our driving standards are so painfully low are key contributing journalists Steve Ottley.
Hey, James.
And Dave Morley. We'll also take a look at the fresh metal we've been driving this week and dive into your feedback. YouTubers, you can jump ahead to each section of the show via the time codes in the notes or chapter markers in the timeline. So let's go. Steve, this coming weekend, we're going to publish a story. So this is actually a preview, a sneak peek, if you like. And you're bemoaning the fact that our driving standards and our behaviour behind the wheel is pretty ordinary, and we need to do something about it. You've said, in the name of safety and sanity. Take us to where your mind was at when you authored this story.
Yeah, thanks, James. Firstly,
there were empty bottles everywhere.
I was probably on a freeway somewhere. Yeah, I did make the point at the start of the story, and I'll make the point now, just so we're clear. I'm not saying I'm perfect, right? I'm not pretending I am the king of all drivers.
You're not?
Yeah, I mean, very close.
Right, okay, fair enough. Yeah.
But I think we've all had those experiences on the road. You know, we are, as a society, not particularly great drivers. You know, we've all had the good fortune to travel the world and see how other countries do it. And, you know, there is a better way. You know, there's a more, I think what it comes down to at the core is that we're not particularly courteous. I think we as a society see the road, when we're on the road, it's like we're going to war. We're not out there sharing a communal space. We're fighting for every inch of tarmac all the time. There's and so, you know, things like keep left and less overtaking. We'll stay in the fast lane for as long as possible because we don't want to have to change lanes. Because what if we get stuck behind someone? Or we don't want to let someone in because if we let someone in front of us, we'll never get where we're going. We'll be doomed to drive the roads forever. We just lack a certain... I think ultimately it's courtesy, right? Could
it be that actually beneath it all, we're just not very nice?
I don't know. Like, I think if you look at other countries, I think a big part of it is a lack of education. We're just not, you know, let's be honest, our driving standards, and we've talked about this in the past and other things is, you know, the driving test is drive around the block, you know, do a parallel park.
I don't know where you stand, Dave, but to me, I've always thought of it as being taught how to operate a car as opposed to how to drive, which are, for mine, distinctly different things.
Yeah, I think that you're dead right. They're two distinctly different things. There's no two ways about that because, you know, it is attitude, isn't it? Let's be honest here. What gets me is that bad drivers or discourteous drivers are a bit like keyboard warriors. You know, they're really brave with the windows up and the doors locked or behind their keyboard. But, you know, should you have the temerity to challenge them, they and I'm not suggesting that you do, however, they turn to water pretty fast.
Sure.
But then again, you don't know either. You know, there's a huge problem in country towns in Australia where you can't walk up the main street at night because there are, you know, kids affected by ice and
right.
And I wonder how much of that is translating to road behaviour because we are a pretty interesting lot in terms of our recreational chemical intake at the minute. And I'm wondering whether the statistics aren't sort of reflecting that. There was one here this week where a guy's been charged with bowling over a cyclist and killing him, and he's been charged with possession of ice at this stage.
And he was okay, and the inference being that he was under the influence.
He's refused apparently, allegedly, he's refused a blood test at the cop shop. But you know, who knows? Who knows what's going on?
It's interesting because, you know, my old mum, when she went to get her driver's license, she's in her 90s, and she just went down to the police station and got the piece of paper, you know, and there you go. So I suppose our history in terms of how we allow people to drive a car is fairly interesting. And the point we've got to now is it's still pretty straightforward and considered to be a rite of passage
a birthright, isn't it?
Rather than a privilege. It's something that everybody should be able to have.
Yeah. That I think is the key, right? Is we see it as a right, not a privilege. We are driving on average now. These are like 2-ton cars, you're driving at over 100 kilometers an hour.
Yep.
They are, like, Dave just said, these are lethal weapons if you use them wrong, right? And yet we see driving as, it's my right. I get to do it. I can do whatever I want now that I'm on the road.
Yeah.
And we don't think of the consequences of getting it wrong. But before that, we're just not thinking about, what is the best way for me to do this? Like, what is the best?
Do you know, I've said it before. It won't stop me saying it again. The late, great Peter Brock always used to say, when he put that seatbelt tongue into the buckle, he consciously thought, this is easily the most dangerous thing I'm going to do today. And I'm going to try and make it a perfect drive. Sadly, he did drive behind the wheel die behind the wheel in a competitive environment. But that was his thought process. I'm consciously going to recognise that this is a very dangerous undertaking.
He's dead.
Yeah,
I won't say that.
Had to be said.
He's spot on. I mean, this isn't drinking milk one day after the expiry date, is it? This is like hurtling through time and space.
Yeah,
in a big piece of metal and plastic and glass, and there's others coming the opposite way. This is driving through a meteor storm.
Yes.
I think, Steve, it's interesting that you say it's a birthright. It's our that's how people approach it. I think equally subconsciously is the fact, and this is a big part of the problem for me, is the fact that most people don't like driving. I mean, this doesn't apply to us. It doesn't apply to people listening to this podcast because clearly we're enthusiasts. But the rank and file Australian is not the least bit interested in driving. They hate it.
Right.
Mrs. Morley, Exhibit A. It's a means to an end. She resents having to do it, but if she's going to get to the shops, that's what she's got to do.
Right.
Now,
but how much of that is because it is hard work at times? Because how much is it just the action? She doesn't enjoy driving a car, and how much of it is there are just people on the road that aren't courteous? It's a bit of both
in her case, and I don't think she's atypical. I mean, I can weld panel steel, okay? I can, with basic hand tools, gap a set of ignition points to within 1 or 2 thou. But I have it on extremely good authority that I can't load the dishwasher to save my life. Now they're all basic physical acts, but I would rather eat off tree bark and then later burn them to make the fire to cook the next meal. That to me makes more sense than stacking a dishwasher. I am never going to be good at stacking a dishwasher because I resent having to bloody do it.
Isn't that interesting? I wonder then, could part of the issue be that frustration that notwithstanding we've just been through a pandemic where the road has kind of thinned out in terms of the amount of traffic, but prior to that, there was just this building kind of crescendo of sheer mass of cars on the road. I wonder if that's changed people's mindset as well.
Yeah, I think it's even deeper than that. I think it's at a fundamental level. This is not an activity I would do, if I had my drive.
Given my choice,
This is not a pleasant experience.
Right.
It's not something I want to do. It's not something I'm interested in. And if I'm not interested in it, I'm never going to be good at it.
Because Dave, I'm not sure whether Steve or Dave, you made the point that you're cocooned in this car and people psychologically have a kind of barrier between themselves and others on the road. And I'm sure we've all seen that, when you want to make eye contact with someone, when you're zippering into a merging lane and all you get is the profile and they just don't want to look at you.
That's a great thing. That's one of the funniest ones I found. Like, it happens all the time. It happened yesterday when I was on the road. When you sort of stopped in traffic and someone wants to come out from a side street, right? And they don't look. They don't look at you because they just assume you're not going to let them in. And so I find it hilarious these days. I did it yesterday. I sat there and I just looked at them. I waited. And then as soon as they look, because they do look, because they obviously make sure you're not going to barrel into their door. Yeah. Well, I'm like waving them in and they're like, hi. Thank. Like being courteous on the road is surprising to people.
Yes.
Here's a safety tip for everyone out there. If you mess up and you cut someone off or you stitch someone up or you put your hand up in the mirror and just say sorry.
Yes.
It could save your life. It changes the attitude of everyone else. It disarms everyone else around you.
Yeah. Well, it's like
wronged.
It's almost like paying it forward, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're able to display courtesy, maybe others get the idea that that's not a bad way to go. Yeah. And that everybody's better off.
I am sure if people did that, if they just acknowledged that they messed up and mouth sorry, people can lip read. there would be less road rage incidents. I guarantee it's
Right.
such a disarming technique. You want to try it.
I do that all the time. You know, well, not all the time, but you know, when you make a mistake,
or even if the system
someone just lets you in.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is where I for a long time was sort of a little bit hesitant to like acknowledge someone just doing the bare minimum, you know, just letting you in. But I think now, like, you know, I had it again, one of those things. This is just since I've written the story, even, you know, these things keep happening. You know, you indicate to change lanes, and the car next to you that's like just behind you, now they have a choice. They can either speed up or just back off a little bit to help you change lanes. Well, most of them will just sit there in your blind spot.
Or speed up to block you out.
Yeah, block you out.
Does that not go to our point that we touched on just a little while ago, which is about the way people are taught to drive? So, Steve, I know you touched on it in the story. To think about spatial awareness, anticipation, courtesy, all of those things that you can consider before you even get in the car. You know, how am I going to approach this drive? I'm going to be careful. I'm going to be collegiate. I'm going to think about everybody trying to get where they're going safely. Those kinds of philosophical things almost aren't touched on in terms of when you go to get a license, and it could be so helpful. And the problem is that governments run licensing, and there's no political capital in it for them to fix road safety in the long term. That's a long-term thing. The payoff is way down the track. Why would I do that? We'll just put some more speed cameras in, and we can tick off the box that says we're doing road safety.
I you know, that's the other thing. I think I made the point in the story. I think in many ways, look, I'm not condoning speeding, but I think this draconian view of speeding, this speed kills, and that's the only thing that kills, is you know, in some it's harmful in a lot of ways. You know, I've lived in Sydney and Melbourne. I grew up in Sydney and moved to Melbourne, and you know, so I learned to drive in Sydney, and you did have to be aggressive if you wanted to change lanes. You had to be proactive. You know, you had to, like, you know, be more assertive, I guess is a better word than aggressive. But when I moved to Melbourne in the early 2000s, it was a breeze. People were courteous, and they did get out of your way. And then I moved back to Sydney, and then I moved back to Melbourne. And in that intervening time, the hidden speed cameras became much more common. You know, unmarked cars, you know, hidden in the bushes, hidden in bins and things like that. And so Melburnians started driving with one eye on the speedo. Like, it just felt like they are not paying attention. Because if you do 55 in a 50 zone, or you're doing 65 in a 60 zone, you're copping a fine.
Well,
you know?
Dave, it's seen very much as binary, isn't it? You know, under the speed limit, safe. Over the speed limit, you're on death's door. And of course, it's much more nuanced than that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a school zone near me where the little darlings have a footbridge. They don't even go on the road. That's 40 in a 70 zone. But there's another section not far from me, another school, which is a 40 zone, but there's cars parked along it. It's narrow. 40 is too fast. You know, 15, 20 is a vastly more appropriate speed at which to proceed. And yet you're perfectly safe at 40.
The other interesting insight, I think, into Australians, we're talking about Aussie drivers, we're actually very passive when it comes to obeying the law. You know, I was talking to an American person who said, you know, speed cameras, they started to put them in Texas. They just got shot out. It would just, like, shotguns would just blast them off the pedestal they were on. Like, we're not having that. Whereas, you know, we do that, and you're right. It's not safe to be constantly juggling your speed or whatever. That's not road safety.
I like, as a parent, you're going through a school zone, I want both eyes on the road. I don't want you looking down at your speedo constantly, making sure you're exactly doing 40 or 30. Look, you can back out of it and you can roll through, but you should have both eyes on the road, looking around and what's safe. And that is ultimately safer than if you're doing 45 or 42 and you're looking at the speedo constantly. You're bouncing up and down. Like,
I wonder also in thinking about how we are managed on the road, you know, rather than making us better drivers, let's just scare people with the threat of penalty so that they're constantly thinking about their speed. Whether we should be in schools, you know, and try, in America, you know, I'm not saying America's nirvana in terms of road safety, but it becomes part of high school education, and you could really have a curriculum that's standardized, and you get closer to a European scenario where your gran isn't teaching you how to drive and passing on all of their bad habits. It's someone who's been independently accredited, and you get a uniform approach to how people drive on the road.
I mean, I think, you know, one of the best examples to me is, you know, when you drive on those autobahns, you know, and you Germany, I guess, is a particularly good example because you can't afford to make a mistake at those speeds. You have to stay. You cannot sit in the fast lane.
And it's such a pleasure. It's such a pleasure to drive there. Yeah.
I mean, the classic example for me is years ago doing a car launch in France for a German company, and they had their photographer come along with us, and I was driving along on the motorway. There was myself and a car probably 10 car lengths ahead, not that far ahead of me. And the German photographer comes up behind me in the slow lane, the right-hand lane as it is in Europe, overtakes me, and then immediately pulls back into the right-hand lane for all of like 2 seconds, 3 seconds.
Yep.
And there's no one else around. He's not worried about, cars behind him. And then he moves out, passes the next car, and then immediately moves back. That would never happen in Australia.
But the thing that kind of respect for lane discipline has so many flow-on benefits in terms of everybody is able to go at a speed that suits them. But the problem I think we've got this blanket 100, 110 kmh on freeways and motorways. If you had some differential between, let's say, heavy vehicles at maybe 110 and passenger cars at 130, you wouldn't get this clumping effect where you just have these big kind of blobs of traffic. Yeah. You could make that work much better for you.
Yeah, the problem with the clumping down here in Victoria on the freeways is everybody's got their cruise set to 111.
Right.
Yes. And no one wants to kick out a cruise. So they sneak up on each other in big, they form these big platoons. These sort of
these bicycle peloton.
Well, they're probably improving the aero in the process. Yeah,
no one can get past anyone, and so the truck will pull out into the right-hand lane to go around, but it takes him half an hour because he's doing 111.5, and it promotes tailgating.
Yes,
this whole thing. Now, if you could get on it and wick it up to 120 and be around and back in.
Yes.
Happy days.
Yes.
Yeah. But no, you'll get busted doing that.
Well, it's quite arbitrary in terms of speed limits in most places. I mean, in other parts of the world, authorities will let traffic run, see what speed most people go to, because people don't want to kill themselves. They'll go to a speed that they feel is sensible, and then start thinking about imposing an appropriate limit for that piece of road.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, the problem with Dave's example is people don't then move back to the left. They always stay. There's always
they're doing 110 and a half.
Yeah, like
that's it. That's it.
So, but I think there's a big thing where people just stay in the fast lane because they're worried, I don't want to move over, and then I'll have to move back, or I'll lose my spot, and then someone won't let me in because inevitably people don't let people in. So you just
but eventually I come up behind them and give them
a circle.
Give them 100 watts. There's a bit of a reminder that they're not the only person in the world.
Here's the example. Like in terms of flashing your lights. To labour the German example, really flashing your lights in Germany is I'm going to hit you.
Yeah,
like it's a really it's an extreme thing to do. It's very rare that you would flash your lights, but it's only but here it's like all the time. People are getting frustrated.
It means your mother was a hamster. It doesn't mean anything else.
No, that's right.
That's the thing, right? That's the problem. Is the mindset is flicking on your indicator to change lanes is almost like sending a signal saying,
Speed up.
What did you say about my mother? What did you say about her? Like, how dare you? It's like, no, I just want to change lane. Or the best example is the lane's ending. Like there's a concrete wall in front.
Something's got to happen.
I need to get out of this lane, and people are just like, well, I'm here, so
you get
It's like, dude, just give me. All you got to do is do something. As opposed to me slamming on the brakes and trying to then jam into traffic. Like it's
all right. Well, let's say we've partially defined the problem. So in terms of solutions, we're just imploring people to be, I suppose, to show some common courtesy and be human.
Yeah. Yes. But I think you're right. The point you made earlier, we need better education. My argument is we make, untold millions. I think we looked at it last year, the amount of money that the New South Wales government, when they took the signs off the unmarked speed cameras, and they made, I think it was, something ridiculous. Like they made more money in a few months than they'd made the previous year. So why can't that money be used for education? I don't understand. Why can you not, if you're making $50 million a year on speeding fines, can you not tip that into a comprehensive driver safety program
Well,
for the state?
It goes into the
consolidated revenue.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, a cynic would say it's just seen as a money-making, endeavor.
Not a cynic, but a realist.
Yeah, but the argument, like, if the government was really serious and the police were really serious about wanting to reduce the road toll,
yes,
spend that money or find the money somewhere else to improve driver standards. If you think young drivers are overrepresented, improve young drivers, make them go through a harder, more laborious process to weed out people that just don't want to drive. You know, more people don't want to drive.
I was going to say, your premise is all wrong. If you were serious about road safety,
right.
If you were serious about road safety, and let's say you were a private company contracting to the government to provide a road safety package, and your solution, after countless, brainstorming sessions and think tanks, if your solution was to hide cameras in the bushes, how do you think that would play? Do you think your contract would be renewed?
That's so true. No,
that's what we've ended up with.
Attitudinally as well, it's interesting. In New South Wales, I'm not sure if it went into other states, but there was a campaign that I'll remember for a long time where it's an outdoor poster. It's a cop with the reflector aviators and a speed gun and saying, "You're in our sights." You know, this adversarial, us and them, speed is everything. Where's the more collaborative, productive kind of thing that encourages people to drive safely? Anyway, I think we're running short of time on this discussion, but that was a good one. That was good. I think we touched on some key points. And Steve, people should look out for your story. They can comment there. Let you know what they think of you and all of that. But in the meantime, we'll move on and we'll go to our garage. And each of us have been driving interesting vehicles in the last week or so. Dave, can I kick it off with you, please? You've been in a rare beast, even though it's technically available for purchase.
Yes, it's one of those things you can buy, but you can't buy. It's a LandCruiser 300 series. Yeah. I had the VX model, which looks like being the volume seller, if not volume deliveries. Look, it's an interesting vehicle because I was expecting a lot from it, and it does deliver a lot. The only thing I'd say about it is I'm not sure that it moves the game along, the off-road family wagon game along too far. It's a little bit more of the same. However, let me qualify that by saying it's more of the same very good thing. You know, the 200 series was great.
Well, they didn't need to reinvent it, did they?
Yeah,
it's incremental.
They didn't reinvent it, but they've really knocked the rough edges off it. I'm not sure that the new V6 has got the charm of the old V8, but you know what? You can't argue with efficiency. And I did a quick run out through the scrub and got it in, easily under 10 litres per 100. Which
that's amazing.
Like that, the motor's well fit. It makes lots of power. It's the 10-speed auto is good. What I did find, though, is I had to force it into 10th. I don't think at Australian road speeds it's ever going to use.
You're going to get there. Yeah, right.
It's not going to.
So probably the top 4 gears are overdriven.
I imagine it'd be the top 3 or 4. Yeah. Yeah, 6 or 7th would be 1-to-1, and first is quite low, and it really makes the best use of that because it picks up quickly. It's the shifts are very smooth. It's a great transmission. What I wasn't mad about it was the interior. The switch gear seems a little bit random to me. All the switches across the center stack are all the same. They're all the same size. They're all the same color, and they all operate in the same direction. So and there's a separate button for volume up and volume down. And volume down, you press the button down, but volume up, you press the button down. I don't understand it. And there's some black chrome switches under the bar of the steering wheel, and you can often get a stray reflection from the rest of the steering wheel that sort of obliterates the icon. It's very hard to see what you're doing, and I still don't know where the phone button is. I had it for a week and I still don't know. But other than that, it's pretty swish. The back seat's better than a vehicle like that normally is. It's finally got fold down seats in the 3rd row rather than flip ups. Yeah. The other only thing I didn't like about it was the pleather, the synthetic leather. It feels, it's not quite human skin, but it's creepy.
If anyone's familiar with trimming things in human skin, it's Dave Morley.
I didn't like the feel of it. It looks great. It looks like leather, but it just doesn't feel right to me. And every time I touched it, I thought, oh, that's not leather.
Okay. All right.
For 113 grand, I think I want leather.
Okay. Good. So to in a nutshell, it's incremental improvements. It's improving an already good thing. With a couple of little niggles here.
And they're important improvements because they're about efficiency and economy.
Yeah.
So,
good.
Yeah,
okay.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Improvements in the right direction.
Perfect. And my recollection is you'll be reviewing that for us. That'll be upcoming in Cars Guide. So that's one to look forward to. Now, Steve, a different fish altogether. Please let us know what you've been steering.
I guess different, but still also in that sort of, I guess, like a lot of cars, available but hard to get. I drove the Chevrolet Corvette. Obviously, it's been a long time coming to Australia. Is what Holden announced that they were going to sell it here, and then that obviously didn't happen. But yeah, it's here now. It costs. I drove the 3LT, which starts at about 160,000. You've obviously got the old school 6.2 Chevy V8. 375 kilowatts, 640 Newton meters, but it's now got an 8-speed dual clutch transmission. Obviously, the engine is in the middle instead of in the front. And all these Aussie cars do come with the Z51 package, which gives you, bigger brakes, bimodal exhaust, adaptive dampers, and LSD. So they're fairly well spec'd. There's, the car I drove, is probably around, 200 grand. So it's not what you would call cheap. But for what it is, it's pretty special. Like certainly I only had it a few days. It got a heck of a lot of looks, it's a real head turner as if you think you're spending, half the money you're spending to get something European, like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, you're getting just as many looks.
What did you make of the local remanufacturing? The switch
to remanufacturing.
It's not. It's out of the factory.
Yeah, it's made factory out of Bowling Green in Kentucky.
So,
yeah.
Okay.
So I think the interesting way to look at it is, is it a Ferrari Lamborghini rifle? Not really. Like, it's very good. It's very quick. But, it's still a Chevy. Like, there's a few things like the infotainment system is what you get in a Chevy. So it's, it looks pretty rudimentary. It's, the cabin is nice. It's obviously that real driver focused cabin with basically everything wrapping around the driver. All the switches sort of run in this huge long strip down the center console, which is an interesting design choice. But, when you consider it's a similar sort of money to something like a BMW M4, then you start to think, that's it's actually pretty appealing.
It's an interesting question, is it not? That the long rumored, but now it's happened, a mid-engine Corvette. Emotionally, the Corvette for so long has been front engine and rear drive. How do you feel driving the car? Does it feel like a Corvette or something else?
Well, that's weird. I guess I never drove a front engine Corvette. No one in Australia has ever driven one. The majority of Australians have not driven one. So.
I drove a few.
Yeah, there's a few around.
Many good ones.
Yeah. No, right.
It's funny. I actually thought for a mid-engine supercar, it's quite easy to live with. Cool. Like it was. They come with a lift kit. Not that because it's it's sort of an entry-level sports car. It doesn't have that huge long rear diffuse that a lot of these modern sports cars have.
There's a front. Is there a front boot and then space at the back as well?
Yeah, storage is, okay for a mid-engine supercar. It's one of those cars that it's probably right on the cusp of, a bit like the R8, Audi R8. Is it a supercar you could live with every day? Probably. You're only going to fit a few overnight bags in either of the storage spaces, but and it's it's not the world's, it's not the roomiest cabin in the world, but I'm about 6 foot and I was comfortable enough. So it's very cool that it's here and that it's available, and it feels, it's something different rather than necessarily an American, it's an American supercar, a bit like the Nissan GTR was kind of it was a Japanese muscle car.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I agree with you. It's great that it's here. I mean, it's a lot of fun. All right. I'll finish things off with another sports car, but not in that kind of league. A Subaru BRZ. And this one's the auto. So you're thinking, okay, how's this going to be? So it's just over 42K drive away. Subaru does the drive away pricing thing. Now it's a 2.4 litre Atmo 4-cylinder, the horizontally opposed, 6-speed auto.
Yeah, it is a 6-speed auto, not a CVT.
That's right. So 174 kilowatts, which is a fair bump up from its predecessor, 250 Newton meters. Atmo engine, that peak is 3,700 RPM. And of course, it's rear wheel drive. The pluses for me, I think it looks great. It looks more substantial and confident. This one was in a silver metallic, and much and all, a silver metallic is almost ubiquitous out there on the road. It suits this car so well. And now it's on 18s. They've gone +1 because just about everyone who bought the first generation car went straight to an 18 wheel. With Michelin Pilot Sport. So we got rid of those primacy HP tyres and something better on the rubber front. The curve treatment along the rockers and these front vents, they've kept everything that was good, but added what people wanted. So more grunt, bigger rims. Even the auto's good. The auto transmission's good. You've got the paddles. It was fun to drive. The steering's brilliant. It even rides pretty well. On the dislike side, put it in sport mode and the throttle gets just a little bit stuttery, particularly at low speed. It doesn't pick up the throttle as cleanly as you might like. The indicator, they've gone to a flick style rather than it going to an indicator down position or up. You flick it and then you have to flick it again to turn the indicator off, which just grinds my gears.
Yeah,
big time. The spare fills up a lot of the boot. When you open it up, there's just a whopping big spare tire, but that's nothing new. The +2 seats are really notional only. You want to have little kids in there with very skinny legs. And the initial allocation of 500 is already sold out. So I suppose they'll be getting another boatload at some stage. But I reckon it's just a comprehensive and pretty desirable second-gen upgrade. I think they've done a good job.
So my question is those Michelins are better tires, fundamentally better tires, but does it actually improve the car? Because I think part of the appeal of the old car was that it wasn't particularly powerful, but it also, those tires were not particularly grippy. They were deliberately put on there by Toyota.
Agreed.
To be, a bit low grip, to balance that lack of power.
I ran an 86 for a year. I had an 86 for a year.
Yeah.
And I got to say, I prefer this. I prefer the 18s with the grippier rubber because the amount of time you're actually going to break traction and, slide the car, unless you're on some kind of drift day, it really doesn't add up. A grippier tire just allows you to plot a sharp course through a corner and enjoy the balance of the car as you go through. I think it's an improvement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good to hear.
Anyway, that's just me. Now, we are going to go to feedback. It's comment of the week. It's on top of the shipping container at the front of the CarsGuide forecourt. Bunting, balloons, the wobbly man, and Sukhoi Romantic, a regular correspondent. We were talking last time around efficiency relative to engine size, and Sukhoi says, from personal experience, going to a small engine affects fuel economy, but I think he's meaning not in the way you'd expect. It says, my 2009 Fiesta 1.6 petrol manual got 6 litres per 100 on my commute, whereas my manual 2014 1.2 petrol Micra got 7.2, and my current 2021 Picanto 1.2 auto gets 7.2 as well. Pretty typical commute for many Melburnians, Eastern Freeway, then Hoddle Street, then Victoria Street. All those cars weigh about a tonne. I suspect having a bit of hybrid torque off the line, and he says, I drive like your nan exquisitely, would help lower these figures. But the point he's making, I suppose, is you go to a little engine and you probably have to push it harder to get the performance that you would like, even in a commute. So your economy figures may not be what you want.
You've also got, if you're on the freeway at any point, aero comes into it. You've also got the fact that, the reason small engines generally use less fuel in a day-to-day sense is it's all about pumping losses. On a bigger engine, you've got the throttle almost shut. On a smaller engine, the throttle's open further. Therefore, you've got fewer pumping losses. So you're running the engine at a more efficient point,
and ideally at a lower ratio, a higher gear ratio.
Gearing will make a big difference. It's. I don't know.
But is it splitting hairs? The difference between 6 and 7 litres, it's still all pretty good fuel economy.
It's still a pretty good commute. It depends on what the traffic's like down Hoddle Street in my experience.
If that's right.
That's right.
Commuting through the city, through peak hour, it's not a bad return.
No.
Anyway, a lot of those tiny little engines, you can drive awfully hard with it, and they're incapable of guzzling.
Yes, that's right. They can't
Believe
take
me,
enough.
I don't know what I can get this up to.
Right. Well, thank you for that, Sukhoi. That was a good one. And with that, we have reached the finish line. So it's time to say thank you, Dave.
No, my pleasure, mate.
And thank you, Steve.
Thanks, James. Always a pleasure.
And thanks to our production maestro, corn detasseler and crime scene cleaner, Mr. Pritchard, for his creativity and courage in pulling this podcast together. Today, he's wearing a T-shirt saying, all tools are hammers except screwdrivers, which are chisels, panda pants and zebra skin disco platforms. Jump into the conversation. Cars Guide's on Facebook and Instagram, or email us at comments@carsguide.com.au. Apple Podcast listeners, please take a moment to rate and review the show. 5 is the preferred number of stars. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to subscribe to the Cars Guide YouTube channel so you can stay on top of all our latest content. But before we go, mechanic close to me has been arrested for dealing marijuana. Strange. I've been going in for years and never knew he was a mechanic.
Please note the views expressed by James, not those of CarsGuide.
Yes, always remember to dial before you dig.
Classic.